Hey everyone, this is my third video tutorial on this channel, and in this video tutorial we are going to take a look at CSS and dive into the basics and the essentials of CSS. I'll walk you through what you need to know as basics, the essentials. We will not be going through any advanced topics, it's just the basics for you to know. I think that's important to know them and practice them before you go on and try to learn the more advanced topics, obviously. There's no requirement for this tutorial. I don't have any prerequisites for you. You don't need to know anything, any programming and so on. But that's basically, that's basically it. There's another video that I have on the channel. It's an HTML tutorial. I recommend you that you go through that before watching this one, but also I'll try to make it so that you don't need to complete that video before in order to be able to understand this one. But anyways, what is CSS? CSS is short for cascading style sheets. It's basically a way to put a style on your web page, and we are gonna see how in a moment. It's still the kind of modern standard way to style web pages, so you're not really learning something outdated. There's different ways to use it, there's different libraries, but still it's used and it's still quite powerful. Right, so to get started, we're going to be using Visual Studio Code. You can use any editor that you want, but basically you just need to be able to know your way around it. I'll show you this one in Visual Studio Code. I think it's a good way to learn. What I want you to do is to find this extension called Live Preview. It basically shows you a live preview of the page as we are coding, and then install it. I've already installed it, so yeah, you will have an install button here, and once you do that, you want to come to an empty folder. I have here this .vs Code folder that you can ignore. It's just the setting for the font size, so the video is easier for you to follow. It's just a bigger font size and a better theme and so on. But then what you want to do here is you click this plus button, and then first you click outside in the main folder, and then you're gonna click this plus button, and then you're gonna create an HTML page. We just call it page.html. It can be anything as long as it has this .html extension. Now, when you come here, you want to type HTML, and then you see this list. Click on the second one with the 5, and then you will get a full HTML syntax. For those of you who are not familiar, this is the basic skeleton of an HTML page. You have some metadata here defined, like the document title, the character encoding, and so on. And then here in the body, that's where we start writing the text. So just to show you how it works with this preview, you want to press Control or Command on Macs, and then Shift P, and then you will have your command window. And then here you want to click on Live Preview, Show Preview Internal Browser, and here you're going to, this extension is going to come in play, and we're going to see a live preview of our page, which is of course empty now. If I come here, if I create a p tag, which is a paragraph, and I say hello world, you can see here I get a live preview of my page. Now, to get things a bit less boring, we are going to change this to I love pineapple with pizza. It's not even pizza with pineapple, it's pineapple with pizza. That's how important the pineapple is in this context. But anyways, we're going to put this, I'm going to put another exclamation mark, and then you can see this is a very bland text. It's not styled, and that's what we're going to do, and that's what CSS is going to help us do. So in order to start with CSS, we need to do two things. We need to first create another file here. I'm going to double click here. It's the same as clicking and then clicking this new file. It's just going to allow us to make a new file, and then I'm going to call it style.css. Again, it can be anything as long as it has the extension CSS. And then there's an empty one. I'm going to come back to our page. I'm going to go to the head tag, and inside here, it doesn't matter where, I'm going to hit enter, and then I'm going to say link rel equals style sheet, and then href. You just need to memorize all this kind of yeah, these attributes. They might sound weird in the beginning, but then yeah, I'm just gonna write href, and then here I'm gonna put the name of the file that we just created, and then I'm gonna close this tag. And now in this way we are connecting our page to the CSS file. Without it, it wouldn't know. They wouldn't be connected with each other, and this style would not be applied. Now if I come here, I can write P to select any P tag on the page, and I can say I want the color to be blue, and I can see it immediately change this color to blue. And now we can see that that just shows that our style is being applied to our page, is being connected. If I add another paragraph and then say, no, I really love pineapple with pizza, you can see it also being applied because here I have this P tag and it applies to all the paragraphs. Now let's take a closer look at what we just did here. Basically what we are doing, let me see if I can put this one down here. There we go. You can see here what we are doing is we're using something called a selector. In CSS, you basically work with selectors because you need to tell CSS what element you want to change. Here we're telling it we want the P tags, and because we haven't specified anything more, it's going to select all the P tags on the page, which is only 2 as of now, and it's going to apply the style, which is the color. If I want to only select the first P tag here, there's different ways to do it. The 2 basic ones that we are going to take a look at is either by specifying a class. I can just say class and then say my lovely blue text. So basically I say that this P is this P tag is of this class my lovely blue text. Now of course this is a text that I just defined. It doesn't mean anything yet because we haven't defined the style. So we need to come to the style sheet and then replace this P with the name of this class. And the way you do it is you put a dot and then you put the class name. And this dot is basically just the way you denominate, if that's the word, that you want to address an element by the class. Now because it's a class of elements. You can see it in this way. So there's multiple elements that can have this class. If I copy this and put it here, you see the other one also becomes blue because I put the class here. If I change this one, put a 2 here, it would not work anymore because there's no class, there's no style defined for this class. So that's basically the idea of selecting an element. This class is basically the one of the very, very core and important ingredients of CSS. You use it to select different elements on the page. Then there's another way which is less used nowadays. It was more of a thing, I think, in the 90s and 2000, and that's to select items by an ID. And that's the way you just remove this one and say, if I say ID and then I would name it whatever, first sentence, sorry, and then I'm gonna come back here and then just remove this one and say first sentence, You can see it works the same way. And if I just move this ID to the second one, it would just, of course it's not a first sentence anymore, but for the case of showing, yeah, it's the second sentence now. Notice that here I put the hash sign instead of the dot, and that's how we say that this one is not a name, it's not a class name, it's an ID. So just to recap, we have the dots, that's for classes, and then we have the hash sign, that's for IDs. But normally in a lot of cases now, it's a lot more conventional to use the class. So I'm just gonna go back and then also hit Ctrl Z here, and then now we get the class. Yeah, so this is basically referring to an element. You use the class and then you target, targeting the element, and you do it in that way. Now, of course, making a text blue is not something you want to do all the time. You want to do more interesting things. And we are just doing a tutorial, a beginner tutorial, so we're not going to do things that are that interesting, but we can try. So what I'm going to do here in the first text, first of all, I'm going to remove the blue because it's not going to be blue anymore. Notice that this is all semantics. It's just for the clarity of the code. It doesn't change any of the functionality. If I put green here and put green, it's not going to change anything because this is what defines the style, right? This is just a text that's meant for me and my team and other developers, the other humans to look at the code to understand. Let's go back to make it just text. It's actually going to be lovely anymore, I guess. Let's not use the word love like that. So my text, and then my text right now has the color of blue. The first thing I want to show you guys is the font family sort of CSS attribute, which surprisingly sets the font family of the text. If I change it, for example, to whatever, let's see what we have, Arial, you can see now it just changed to Arial, and then you kind of chain them together. So you say if the user's computer has Arial, you would use Arial. If not, you'll use Helvetica, and then if not, you'll use this kind of basic sans serif one. I think if I just remove these, okay, that's not really visible. Maybe I have neither of these, but basically this is what you want to do, because you cannot always rely on the first font being available. I think, for example, I don't have Helvetica. Well, I guess maybe it just translates to something else. But anyways, this is basically how you define a font family. Now, next thing we want to take a look at is font size. And this can be different values. You can put a value in points. You can see 20 points. That's more if you're used to the Word, Microsoft Word, or other sort of word processors of doing things. I think it's more customary to use something like pixels because we're working with web, and the kind of measuring unit of web is pixels. There's also something else that I kind of want to introduce you to. It's not a very basic one, but still I want you to at least be familiar with, and that's the EM units. And that's basically is a multiplier of the base font size of the page. So if I put this to 2 EM, this will be twice as big, I think twice as big of the main font size of the page. Or maybe it's not exactly in a linear way. We can see here it becomes, I think it is twice as big as this one's in terms of the font size. You can put different values. Usually it's multiples of 0.25. So if I put 1.25 or yeah, something like this, right? 1.5. It's really up to you how you want to put it. There's also people who put 1.75 and so on and so forth. If you really want to make it large, 3 EMs, you can see it becomes triple the size and so on. Let's put this to 2 for now. And then we're gonna, the next one we're gonna take a look at is font weight, and that's the weight, this sort of, yeah, the weight of the font, if it's bold or bolder and so on. If I click bold here, you can see it becomes bold. And there's also bold there, which I'm not sure my font supports, but some fonts have this bolder yeah, font size. I haven't seen, I think if you have a very specific design, you would use it. Otherwise it's either bold or sometimes you have medium, which again this font doesn't support. You also have numbers for the font size. You can see we have all these numbers. I think normal is 400 or I think 500, I'm not sure, but you don't need to worry about these for now. You can just use the normal, the sort of the ones that are described with word, like bold or yeah, I think that's it. And then let's say you want to make it italic, then you would use font style, and then you can see here you have italic. You have all these other options as well, but yeah, italic I guess is the one that you'll be using if you want to apply font style. Next thing we want to do, we want to set the color, just to like take a deeper look into it. There's different ways to set the color. You can just put the letters. So if I the name, so if I put, I don't know, red, you can see it becomes red. There's also dark red, it becomes dark red. You can see as I start typing, or if I hit Control space, I get a whole list of different colors that I can use. Maroon, for example. There's also a way to define color, and that's there's another way basically to use the hex sort of code of the color. This is a base 16 way of defining the red and the green and the blue. So if I put let's say if I put how do we do this? If I want no red, no green, and a lot of blue, then there we go. And you can see we can just go lower. If I put this to 99, now there's less blue here. I can add more green. Maybe this could be EE, and then now it gets a lot of green and so a lot of blue. It just mixes them up. You can also write RGB and then in brackets. Then again, the red color is something but number between I think 0 and 255. I cannot remember if it's including 255 or not. But again, you would always just get these colors from somewhere on the internet. So like this, and then it's combining these colors. But again, usually you would just use some color tool. I think also here in Visual Studio, there's some extensions that allow you to just set the color using a color picker. But for now, we can set this to dark. Let's use maroon. It's a good color. There we go. Next thing we want to do is we want to align the text. I'll just show you how it's done. It's just called text align, and then you can say center or left or right. If I put right, yeah, it's gonna go all the way to the right. Center, it's gonna be in the center. Let's keep it in the center. And actually, just to show you how the concept of different selectors, we will apply this text align to all the text. So instead of putting it here, I'll remove this one. You can keep both as well. And then I'm just going to write a P tag to select all the P tags. And I'm going to say text align center. And now we get all the text centered. Next thing would be the text decoration. So text decoration. And this is basically if you want some underline, or let's see, what is this double thing? I don't think it's taken any effect. Or underline. There we go. We have some underline here. Yeah, that's just basically the different types of decoration you can have for your text. And again, you also have things like the line height. I think this is just a number. I can put 3. You can see now that this line here is of height 3, so it's sort of yeah, it's taller. If you can say that it takes more vertical space, it's more height. You can also use letter spacing. Now I cannot remember the formula for this one specifically, but if I put like 5 pixel, you can see now there's a 5 pixel space between each of the letters. Let's put this to 2, so it's a bit, well, maybe even 1. Now it's a bit more legible. And let's put this to 2 maybe, so it's nicer. And yeah, that's basically how you style your text. Often you see we have a font family, font size, font weight. Of course, you don't have to define all of these, but that's how you define style for your text. Now, the next thing we want to take a look at, that's the box model, and that's the idea of yeah. Let's take a look at it, and then you'll see. All right, so what we are going to do is we are going to create a box. And the way you create boxes in CSS is by using a div tag. And a div is basically a box on a page. It can have border, it can not have border, it can have other divs inside it, but that's basically just a way to just specify an area on a page. We're going to see in a moment. So if I type div and then hit tab, we can just do this manually. I'm going to have a div, and inside this one, I can have any number of elements that I want. I can have another p tag, for example, let's say hello. I can have another one, and so on. But what we are going to do is we are going to come to this emoji website, and we're going to take this fancy person, I guess, emoji here, and we are going to type it here, right? So now we have this, this person with sunglasses picture emoji here. Now, what I would want to do is I'm gonna put a class and say my div, and I'm gonna come here and then define a style for this my div, where I would be saying I want the font size to be let's say 2 EMs, maybe 3 EMs, and now we get this, so it becomes larger, this emoji. And now we're going to start styling our div. The first thing I want to show you guys is a border, because then we can see where it is on the page and how much spacing it has around it and inside. And the way you would do that is you put border, how many width you want, maybe 2 pixels, solid, this could be also something else, and then we put let's say dark orange. And you see, by putting this, we got a border. Notice that a div, it's called a block element. There's two main categories of elements. One is called block, and the other one is inline. A text is, for example, inline. It always takes the part inside of whatever container it is. But then you have these block elements that take the width of the entire page. They take the entire available width, whatever is in their container. For example, if I put another div inside, it would only take this space that's available inside the div. And you're gonna understand that it's gonna get easier in a second. But basically, this is what you do. You just put a border around the entire div. Now, what we want to do here, we want to put some margin. And that's basically the way you add spacing around your element. So if I want some spacing here to the left, I put margin left and then maybe 50 pixels. What did I do? Close this one. There we go. So you can see here, I got some margin to the left. I can put some margin to the top, maybe 100 pixels. And now you can see I got some margin to the top. I can also put this on all the divs. I can say I want the margin bottom to be 200 pixels, and they all just put this 200 pixel margin. We don't want that, but that's basically how it works. You get some spacing around the element. Now, of course, if I want to say margin, let's say I want to have a margin right of also 50 pixels. And then a margin bottom. Of course, we're not going to see it of 100 pixels. We're not going to see it because we don't have an element here. But if I put, for example, a hello here, you can see now we have this spacing beneath the element as well. Now, there's a lot of there's a lot of cases where you would define a margin on all the different directions, which means that it can be a bit too verbose to have to write to all these 4 lines. And there's a way to combine them. So instead of all these, you can just you say margin, and it's basically a shorthand way of doing it. And then you can give it either 4 values, which would be top, right, bottom, left, so top, and then you go clockwise. Or you can just say, give it 2 values, which would be first the value for the top and the bottom, and the second one would be for left and right. So here, to replicate what we just did, I'm gonna put 100 and then 50, and then you can see it does the same. If I only put one value, it's going to affect all the four sides. But let's put it in this way, or just let's put it to 50. Yeah, that's fine. We can keep it like this. Next thing would be the padding of the element, and padding is spacing inside. So if I put padding, and it basically follows exactly the same format. You can have left, right, top, bottom. I'll just simplify and say I want a padding of 25 pixels. Then you can see I get 25 pixels inside the element. So the margin is outside the div and padding is inside it. And then you can also have a padding. If I put this to just padding top, it's only going to be top. You also have the left, right, exactly the same rules for the margin apply to the padding as well. Then the last thing I want to show you in this section is the width and the height. You can see here is taking a lot of width. If I want to change it, let's say if I can just use a text align center, now that this item comes to the center. Now, if I want to adjust the width and the height, the way to do it is basically to just put a width. I can set this to maybe 200 pixels, and I can see now it's taken only 200 pixels of width. I can change the height as well. I can be like, this can be 500 pixels. Now we can see it just took a lot of width. Now 500 pixels. Of course, we're a bit zoomed in, so it's gonna take sort of, yeah, more space. I'm gonna remove it. Usually you wouldn't want to, at least for the height, you wouldn't want to define it because you have different elements. I don't know, for example, if you have a recipes website, different recipes could take different heights, so you wouldn't do that. You would just define the paddings and so on more often than not. And then there's the idea of having a minimum and maximum width, and that's how much space it can take at minimum or at maximum. It's a bit more intermediate level. It's basically just min width to something and then max width. Yeah, simple as that. But for now, you can just go ahead and practice with this these kind of values. Next, we're going to take a look at background colors, or just the background in general. We're going to come here again. The way you define a background color is, yeah, just background color basically. This could be maybe a light blue because I'm super bad at coming up with colors. But yeah, like a light blue, and you can see now we have a color for our div. There's also other types of background. You can have a background image, and then you would put a URL, and then here you would put the URL of your image. But we don't need to worry about it for now. I mean, you can go and practice it. It's pretty simple. You just put a background image instead of a color. And that's how you define a background for the div. If I want a background for my entire page, I will just select the entire body, and then I say I want the background color of light green, and then you can see the entire page becomes green. But of course this looks pretty ugly, so I'm just gonna remove this one and let it be the default color. Okay, the next thing I want to show you guys is the concept of positioning in CSS. Now, to display that, to demonstrate it, I will get rid of some of the elements that we have here. Let's remove these two lines because they're not going to be relevant for this part of the tutorial. I would also remove this other line, and we have now this div, and then inside it, I'm going to remove the background color. And also I'm going to remove the emoji, and we are going to replace it with another div. I'm going to call this the inside div. So we have the inner div, sorry. There's the inner div. And then also let's remove this font size. We don't want it to be very large. Yeah, so now we have an inner div. Then I'm also going to change the class here. Let's make it outer div, and then we can call this inner. Let's just call this outer and inner. So outer and then inner, and then I'm just gonna sort of get rid of all the styles that we have defined so far. So we're gonna have an outer and then the inner class, and here we are going to define the classes for these two. Now this is not really necessary for the sake of the position, but to make it the demo easier for you guys, the outer div is now basically let me just give these a border so you see where they are. 1 pixel solid black. Now you can see this is the outer div that we have. We can also change this to dashed, so then yeah, it looks a bit kind of cooler. So now we have this outer div. Notice that it takes the entire width of the page, but the height is only limited to how much content you have inside. We can define some padding, let's say 20 pixels. Now we get some padding inside, and then the inner div, I can put a border of 1 pixel solid, and then let's say maroon again. The reason I like this because I just bought a sweater that is a color maroon, and I think it's really cool. At least I think it's cool, and that's the only important thing, right? But basically, so this is yeah, so that's just how we're going to do it. And then I'm also going to define a bit of padding here, maybe 10 pixel, and I think yeah, we're good for now. So yeah, I can see we have this outer div, and then we have an inner div inside here, and I think this is a good setup. So I show you guys how the concept of layout and positioning works. So notice that this element here is taking the entire width of its container, which is the outer div, and that's because we have something called the display property, which is by default for a div, it's a block. It's a block element, meaning that it takes the entire width or just spans across. It's like if you imagine, yeah, a div or something that's like a box or a shape on the page, as opposed to just a text that's supposed to be inline. Now, if I change this to inline, notice the way it now only takes the width that it's necessary for its content. Now, the problem with inline is more if you have some text. Let's say if you have some like, hello, I'm having an amazing day, and then you want to have the word amazing with a different style, then use inline. But if you want to define a width and height, let's just quickly show that. If I want to put the height to 200 pixels, notice that nothing changes here. And that's because when you put a display to inline, width and height don't matter. It's just an inline element. It's meant to be inside a line of text. And if you want to have a width and height, but still you want it to only take the space that is needed for it, there's a mix of the two types of displays, and that's inline block. And that's basically, it says, I want this to be a block. I want it to have its height and width, but I want it to be part of, I want it to be in an inline way. It's just takes the space that is necessary. Yeah, and then that means I think I can just go and say hello here. Now notice the way it comes here to the right of it. If I remove this, aka if I just leave it to be block, it takes the entire width, and the next element goes underneath. Yeah, so that was the first thing I wanted to show you guys, the concept of display being block, or yeah, inline or inline block. There's another value we can put for it, and that's none, and that's basically where you just remove the element from the page. Sometimes you want to do this because you want to have different conditions for which you show the element or don't show the element. For example, some elements you might not want to show them on mobile devices because they occupy too much space, and then maybe the user experience will not be as good if they're being displayed on mobile devices or small devices. Notice the way in Visual Studio I get this color picker. It's really cool. You don't even need to memorize the names of the colors. Of course, we won't see this now because I removed the display. But if I change this back to, let's just do it like this. So we go back. There we go. Notice the way I can just use this to change the color. Yeah, now it's just being changed and so on. Right, but let's go back to the maroon because I really like my new sweater. Right, so the next thing I want to show you guys is the concept of positioning, and this is where I really want you to focus. If you're snacking or something, just put it aside. Focus on this part. It's kind of important, and it's not as intuitive or as easy to understand as the other parts of CSS, like colors or font size and so on. And that's the idea of positioning. Now, what is the positioning? Notice that this div is just taking its kind of inherent position in this outer div, because we made this outer div and then we put some padding, and then we say, okay, there's a first element. We want it to be here. It's just being here. It doesn't have a position for itself. Now, if I want the inner div to have a position, let's say I want it to take 20 pixel distance from the top of its container, and for that I will have to write top 20 pixels. Let's put it maybe 100 pixels so it's more visible. And I think I'll just need to put this to inline block, because position, I think it's only applied if you have a block element or inline block element. Now notice the way we put this top bit, but it got ignored by CSS, and that's because by default the elements are not meant to have a specific position. They just take the position that's inherent in how they're structured on the page. For example, here we have this element, it just takes its default layout position inside its parent container. Then what you want to do to have the position reflected is two things. One is that you want to go on the outer element. Let me show you like this. If I put this one to position relative, notice that it takes a space, but now it goes outside this container div. And then this is where I really want you to focus, because it gets a bit complicated. What it's doing now is it's taking the position that the element had and then pushing it down 100 pixels. If I put this to, let's say, minus 20 pixels, notice it just goes up because it was supposed to be here. Now it's 20 pixels up. And that's kind of not what you want, right? So when you're using a position on an inner element, almost always you want to put position relative on the parent. Notice the way if I put it like this, actually nothing changes, because yeah, I forgot to put one more thing, and that's because this one should be then absolute. That's not working really well. Yeah, and okay, let me just set the height of the outer element as well. So I'll just set a height that's larger so we can see. There we go. So 500 pixels. Notice the way that now this inner div is taking a position. So basically, what you want to do, let me put it this way. What you want to do is you want to put position relative almost always on the outer container div. And this is basically telling the CSS that whatever position I define on the element inside, if it's of type position absolute, it's going to be relative to the parent container. Basically, what happens is you define this position absolute, and then it's going to go up in the element hierarchy, and it's going to find the first element that has position relative, and it's going to define the position relative to that. So if I put this to, let's put a bit more, how do we do this? Let me put another div here, just hello. Now, okay, so now we have more space up here. Now if I put this top to 0 pixel, it gets stuck on the top. Let me also remove this padding so it becomes more clear. So now top is 0. It's being stuck to the top edge of the outer container. If I remove this position relative, it goes all the way to the top of the page. That's because none of the parent elements have position relative, so by default it just uses the page sort of coordinates to position itself, and that's not what you want. Often you want this to be relative to its parent, so I would put, for example, 20 pixels, and now it gets pushed down 20 pixels, left 20 pixels again, and now this is how it works. You might be wondering why we're not using the padding here, for example, and that's really depends on the case. For example, this could be a menu item, menu button, not an item, menu button where you open the menu, and then you always want that to be, usually you see menus, for example, also this one is like on top right corner, or just yeah, elements are, if you want to have a menu button here, but then the rest of the elements you want them to take a different kind of position, you would use the position property. It's not used as much. You'll use usually either something called a flex box or a grid, which I'm gonna show you in a moment. But basically that's the idea, that you just position elements like this. Notice that instead of the top, if I make this a bit smaller, let's put 250 pixels. I'm gonna make it 2 pixels. So yeah, okay, I should have done this from the beginning. Now it's clearer. if I change this to bottom, now it positions itself with the bottom property instead. I can also change this to right. Now we have an element on the bottom right corner of the page, and yeah, you have basically top, bottom, left, right, and then yeah, that's how you can position the element. There's also one last thing. If we have a lot of elements on the page, sometimes you want to have an element that stays there regardless of the scroll position. If I, for example, just make another one of these and then another one underneath, notice that we can scroll. And then maybe I want this one to always stay on top. Sometimes you have a pop-up or a heady or a site header, a nav bar, and so on. You want it to always stay on a certain position, at a certain position. And to do that, you would set the position to fixed. And let me just change this to top so it's easier to see. And of course, I'll also remove this one because that's only relevant if your position is absolute. Now our position is fixed. So, excuse me. So yeah, this is how position fixed works. It just gets, you see, no matter where I'm scrolling at, it's always 20 pixels to the top and 20 pixels to the right of the page. And that's how position fixed works. Now I'm going to get rid of these and also this hello div. And let's keep it the way it is, but then I'll go back to having the padding because yeah, we don't want to, like, so let's not be distracted by the positions again for this part of the tutorial. Right, so now we have this this sort of basic setup. Again, next thing I want to show you guys is how to lay out elements, multiple elements in a div. So let's say if we had multiple divs, I'll change this to 1, and then I'm just gonna copy it. We have 1, 2, 3, maybe a 4, and now we have these 4 elements. And I'll also remove this display thing. They become the default way that elements are rendered in CSS. So now we basically have an outer div. It has some padding, and then we have 4 divs inside. Now let's say we want to position these in a row or side by side. To do that, we use something called the flexbox in CSS. Flexbox is a rather slightly complex subject because there's different ways you can do it, and a lot of modern websites use it to lay out elements on the website. But basically, I will just show you guys the basics of it. For a lot of cases, that'll also be enough, but I highly encourage you to go and sort of dig deeper into it after this video, watch other videos, or go to tutorials, read tutorials, and so on, and get more practice with it. What we want to do here, let's say we want to show these elements side by side without having to define it as in display inline. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the outer div, and I'm going to say display, and then I'm going to write flex. And notice that the moment I write this, they become side by side. They occupy yeah, they occupy the space in a different way. And I'm also going to remove the height because that's a bit distracting for now. But basically now we have the elements sort of positioned next to each other. Of course, now that you see they're back to back, so we want to define some gaps. So I'll define a gap of 10 pixels, and I'll notice that they just become like this. And that's basically how the concept of Flexbox works. Now, there's different ways you can position the elements horizontally and vertically. To adjust the horizontal positioning, what we could do is we could use the justify content property. And there's different ways you can do this. There's basically 3 main ones. There's start, which is the start, and there's end, which just puts them to the end of the container. And then there's center, where you can just put them in the center. We can keep them in the center for now. And the next thing I want to show you is if I take a look at this one, this div number 2, for example, if I put a BR and say new line, notice the way it takes more height, and then the other elements also sort of follow suit. So now you have this this element that is sort of taller, and then you have these other elements as well taking the same height. Now let's say we don't want that. We want the elements to be positioned vertically in a different way. What we could use is the other kind of very commonly used flexbox proper attribute, and that's the align items attribute, and that's something we can set to different values. You can say start here, for example. Notice the way I put this. Now all these elements take the start position. This is start vertically, so start is here and it ends here, and notice they're just being pushed up, and this one is taking more space. Let me just put one more new line again, and then yeah, you can see here now yeah, it just takes as much space, but they're all kind of, they get stuck to the top of the container. I can change this to end, and notice the way they go to the end and then center, and then they all come to the center. Yeah, and that's basically how you use a flexbox. There's I would say, in my opinion, there's these 4 that are the most commonly used. There's the flex, display flex, that's something you need to use the flex box. That's the sort of the entry point. And then you have the align items, which is to position items vertically, and then you have justify content, that's to position the items horizontally, and then you have the gap. Now sometimes you want to go to the individual elements and let them occupy more space relative to the others, and that's where you use the flex property itself. Let's say we want to take this third div, and then I'm gonna give it an ID, say div 3. I'm gonna come here and say I want div 3 to have a flex of 3. And now notice the way it's taking 3 times space relative to the other elements. I think it uses the largest element here. You can see it's 3 times this, the width of this one. If I set it to 2, well, I guess it's the same. I guess that's just remember, but then basically that's how this works, that you let the element take more space. I can then come here, for example, div 4, and then say I want div 4 to take 3 here, and now it's the way, notice the way it's distributing the space. I can set this to 4, for example. Okay, now you see this more clearly. So div number 4 is taking 4 units of space, and then this one is taking 2 units. Okay, this is not a set unit. This is just relative to how much space you have on the page. This could be any number. If I put this to 20, now it just takes as much as 20 units would allow it to. Then I put this to 40. It's gonna push it back, because these are relative to each other. They're not a specific unit. Okay, let's get rid of this one again. Next thing I want to show you guys is there's another way to position elements, and that is actually let's show one thing. Before that, I want to show you one more thing that might come in handy for you. Let's say I'll just copy this one a lot of times. Notice the way it's just going outside its container div, and that's because there's one more property I need to set if I want these to come to the next line, and that's called flex wrap. Usually it's set to this value called no wrap, but honestly I don't know why. But then when you put it like this, notice the way they come to the next line, and then here you can just say justify content. If I set it to start, they come to the start. Now this is how you can implement wrapping on the elements. But just for you to remember that usually with text things wrap automatically, but with Flexbox you need to wrap them manually. Let's remove these elements. Go back to our 4 elements from before. Yeah, and the next thing I want to show you guys is something called the grid. It's one of the newer concepts introduced to CSS, and that's why maybe if you look up for some answers or tutorials on the internet, some of the older ones may not have it, or maybe some of the older developers would not be using it. But anyways, well, it's not really new anymore. It was new a few years ago, but it's also very handy and good to know. And then the way you do it is very simple. Display, this time you write grid, but notice that now nothing changes, and that's because for grid we need to define okay, so the way grid works is either you define columns or rows, or sometimes both, and that's what it expects you to do. So if I write grid template columns, and here I can define how many columns I have in my grid. So, and the way you do it is you put a number, which is the relative number, kind of like the flex thing we saw with 20 and 2 and 3 and 4, and you write FR, which is basically just a unit that says relative to the other columns. Now notice I put 1, nothing happened, and now I have 1 column basically. If I change this to 2, now I get 2 columns. So now I have a grid that has 2 columns, and of course it has 2 rows because we have 4 elements. But if I add a 5th one, then you would see this in a better way. Now I have a 5th element here, so 2 columns, and then 5 elements, and then they just spread across in this way. Again, we also have the concept of a gap. Let's set it to 5 pixel. You see it here. You can also define the gap specific to horizontal or vertical. I think it's called horizontal. Yeah, okay, so it's actually called a row gap and column gap. So if you say row gap, you can define this to, let's go crazy, 30 pixels, and then column gap, 5 pixels. Now you see I get a lot more vertical gap than the horizontal gap, but we want to keep them simple, so let's just go back to 5 pixels, and now we have a gap basically between the elements. Now I can of course change the columns. I can say that I want a 3rd column. Notice that now they spread across 3 columns, and this FR thing I can change. Let's say I want to say my middle column, I want it to be larger. I can put this to 2, and now the middle column takes twice as much space as the other columns. I can take the first column and say I want this to take 3 times space, and then it takes 3 times the space. Notice that the way it's all relative, right? So it just adds these values and then divides the horizontal space according to them. So that's how you kind of get this kind of setup here. You could also do the same with rows. It's basically, I'll just go back to 1 FR for all of them. And then what you could do is instead of grid template columns, you would just say grid template rows. And that's how you sort of change it. Right now we got only, I think it expects you to have columns defined first. So if I say grid template rows, and then if I say 2 FR and then 1 FR, let's make this 3. Okay, now I can see it clear. With the rows, it's I think it's more to just define how much space each row is taking, because naturally when you have columns, when they go sort of wrap to the next line, they would take the next column and so on. But I think more often than not you would use the columns, because in CSS usually elements stack up on top of each other, but if you want them to be side by side, you use either the flex box or the columns. Notice the different use cases for flex versus grid. Flex is more like we have a bunch of elements in a row, we want to space them. You can see even in here in Visual this thing, for example, you have this back button, you have this one, you have this one, then you take the space here for an address bar and so on. You don't really care, you don't really see them as columns, you just see them as a bunch of elements that are in a row, kind of back to back. But if we want to have columns, let's say you have a cooking website, and then you have different columns where you put different categories of recipes on it, then you use the columns, then you use grid, and then you use the columns. Right. The last thing I want to show you guys, actually not the last thing. There's a small thing I want to show you guys before we move on to the last thing, and that's the different units actually for spacing. So far we've been using pixels. There's a unit that's kind of newer, and it's a bit more preferred, and that's called rem or rem. And the way it works, it's just like pixel, but it's larger. So if I put this to 1 rem, notice that they take kind of more space than 5 pixels. And that's because this rem is relative to the base font size of the page. And that's a good thing about it, because when you're developing front-end applications, you need to think about different users that might have different laptops, different screens, different zoom on the screen, and then you want to make sure they will all get a good experience from the website. So here I put the grid to 1 rem, and then it's going to take this, it's always going to be relative to the base font size of the page. It's going to be, of course, the pixel will also kind of work out well if you zoom in, but this is going to be smoother, and it's going to give the user a more kind of consistent and a nicer experience. So it's not like they would zoom in and then all the elements would start kind of looking weird and running into each other and so on. Often you would not, the 1 unit is pretty large, so sometimes you would use half a rem, or I think 375, that's like in between half and 75. So yeah, and then you would just use half a rem. That's kind of like a standard spacing between 2 adjacent elements. You also put this to 2 larger, but then basically this is how you should be using, how you should be defining the spacing. I suggest you don't get too much used to using pixels, get used to this one instead. It's better, it makes your pages more responsive. I can also change this one to, for example, 2 rem. Notice the way it's now a lot more space, right? Let's put this to 1 rem. And now this kind of looks neater. And the way I think about it is always that, okay, if it's 1 rem, it's kind of like you want to show to the user that this is a sort of a separate element on the page. If you put 2 rems, then they're really separated. If it's just half a rem, they're just elements that belong to the same category, but they are, yeah, you just want to make sure they're not stuck to each other. Something like that. For borders and other things, you can just keep using pixels. That's because we're not talking about spacing here. It's just a pixel, basically a border of a 2 pixel width. Right. The last thing I want to show you guys is how to put media queries, and that's basically where you define different styling based on how large your screen is. Let's take a look at an example. So I have this adder div. I would put its background color to, let's say, light blue. Now I get this background color here. Now let's say I want it to be so that if I sort of make this page narrow, I want a different background color, just to demonstrate an example for you. The way you do that is you define a media query like this, and you don't put it on a specific element. This is on the root of the page. So you write @media, and then you open brackets, you say max width, and then you define a width. We can be like, I don't know, 700 pixels. And then inside here, it's kind of like writing CSS again. You will target your element that you want, and then now you can define a background color, say pink. Max, I think we are on a lot of max width here. Okay, let's put this smaller. Let's make this 300 pixels. Okay, so now we have the style. Now nothing changes. We still have our light blue color. That's because we put this max width here. This basically says if the width of the page is up to 300 pixels, apply this style. So if I take this and make it smaller, notice the way, yeah, there we go. Now we get a pink background color. If I go back, it gets different. The way this comes in handy is, for example, if I want to say that on a small screen, I want to have only 2 columns. Notice that they're being maybe too narrow here. Maybe it's not really nice because now each word is on a new line, and that's not really easy to read. And to change that, we use these kind of media queries. So here I can just say I want a different way for the columns. I can be like create template columns, and then I just define 2 columns, or sometimes even 1. And let's put this to, let's say, 450 pixels. And then notice now if I make this smaller, now I get 2 columns. If I come back here, I get 3 columns, and so on. And this is also a very typical use case of media queries, where you define basically how your styling should be on different screen sizes. There is a very good, there's a very good page. There's also other pages or references you can use on the documentation for this library called Bootstrap. It's on this website, getbootstrap.com, and then you go to this place called breakpoints, and it's basically a good way for you to understand how these works. You can see here it says for small devices, phones, landscape phones, actually you have this breakpoint that you use. These are all, they're kind of arbitrary, they're conventional, but it's also, I think a lot of them would use something around the same value as a lot of websites. And basically it says if you want a phone, if you want something to be only shown in a certain way on a phone, you use this one, and then on tablets this one, on desktops, and then large desktops, and then super large desktops. I don't think you would use this often, maybe not even this one often. What you were mostly worried about is phones and sometimes tablets, because when a user goes on their phone to check your website, you don't want your website to look bad, so you want to make sure it looks perfect there as well. And then you use these media queries. Notice the way it's using min width instead of max width that we showed, and that's because there's a concept in UI development, design and development, and then that's the idea that you want to be mobile first. So you want to first make sure things are right for people who are using a smaller screen on mobile phones and so on, and then you go up to the desktop. And that's because in this way you make sure that all the elements are correct, are correctly positioned and so on smaller devices, because they're more limited in terms of the space. So once you go on a larger device, then of course there's less limitation in terms of the space, so the user experience would be easier anyways. And then you just adjust it and you say, okay, now if I have 2 elements that are on top of each other, when we go to a large device, I want them to be side by side. And that's basically how this works. You kind of want to think about the mobile first. Of course, maybe not all the time you want to think about this. Maybe if you're designing a prototype, and then you're in a rush, you would just make it for the web page that you're just using when you develop, and then you would go and fix it for the mobile. But as a matter of a concept and a principle, it's a good idea to use to think about mobile first. That was it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed. Again, if you liked it, I would be more than happy to hear your comment, or if you subscribe and so on. And once again, I'm super beginner to making YouTube videos. Any comments, any feedback will be more than welcome. I highly encourage you to go and just practice, spend some time, and sort of make sure you get a good understanding of CSS as well. Go look up different tutorials on the internet, practice, try to take any website and try to make it with CSS. Now there's also the HTML video that I put up. So both of these videos, you can use them basically to make more or less any website. So you can just go around on the internet, try to make a basic version of different websites, and then that's how you learn and how you get around the different corners and edges of CSS as well. There's also some more advanced things in CSS that we didn't go through, but these are basically the basics that I thought would be the kind of the essentials. They're still quite important. These are the stuff we went through are still the base concepts. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and again, please let me know of your feedback or any comments.